This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and graphic design. I'm Nick Manise. On today's program, we find out how Sir John Soane was, quite possibly, the first modernist architect. And we discuss the links between architecture and film through the lens of the new award-winning feature, The Brutalist. Plus, a visit to a pottery studio and exhibition space in London. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. We start today's program at the Sir John Soane's Museum in London. Here, a new exhibition called Soane and Modernism, Make It New, explores how its namesake architect was a forerunner of the design style. Working in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Soane emphasised light, open space, abstract forms, and restrained use of ornament. It's an approach that draws parallels with the likes of Le Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright, Adolphe Loos, and Erno Goldfinger. We join this programme's producer, Maylee Evans, on a tour of the exhibition, courtesy of the museum's assistant curator, Erin McKellar. Erin started by sharing why the show's title, Make It New, felt apt as a starting point.
Make It New is credited to American poet Ezra Pound, who was a modernist poet, who believed at the time that everything should be new for the 20th century to reflect the changing conditions of the world. We start from Make It New because I think visitors to the museum often see the museum as something sort of caught in time, something inherently old, without remembering that Soane, for his time, was really cutting edge. And so this exhibition has been conceived to remind visitors that Soane himself, a primarily 19th century architect, was really thinking of the conditions of his time, ways in which to make architecture fresh and exciting and new. We have a series of themes around architecture, themes that are really present in modern architecture especially. So things that we think of like light and space, modularity, materiality. The drawing matter drawings, really the only collection of its kind in Europe, gives us an opportunity to get together some real hallmarks of architectural modernism and pair them with Soane's drawings so that we can see how a century ahead of the curve Soane is thinking in these really modern terms. We're standing in front of one of Soane's drawings of Dulwich Picture Gallery, actually under construction. Next to it is a drawing by Le Corbusier of the Government Museum and Art Gallery in Chandigarh. These are separated by more than a century. Soane at Dulwich Picture Gallery did something really cutting edge. So Dulwich Picture Gallery, the first public art gallery in this country, Soane's really thinking about how to display art. He decides well lit. So he illuminates the collection from above. At Chandigarh, at the Government Art Museum, we see something similar happening. It doesn't take the form of the lanterns that Soane creates, and by lanterns I mean sort of a projecting kind of mini building full of light on top of the roof. Soane is famous for his roofscapes. Instead, what Le Corbusier gives us at his museum is shafts of light which penetrate the building and a band of windows around the top, which gives us natural light throughout the building, but also protects from the hot sun that you would get in that part of India. Now we're standing in front of a pair of drawings. One by Soane is of the conservatory at Pittshanger Manor. This is his country house that he lived in before he lived in number 13 Lincolnton Fields. Then we have this paired with Erno Goldfinger's Westminster Bank at Alexander Fleming House, which was part of the redesign of Elephant and Castle after the Second World War. Both of these drawings celebrate the modularity that I think so much of 20th century architecture has become known for. So think the grid, think skyscrapers with lots of windows and so on. Soane's conservatory is, I think, to a lot of visitors, almost shockingly modern. It sort of reminds us of a curtain wall skyscraper. It's not that, but it reminds us of it. And it's not how it was built. So it was built only to one story, but this drawing reveals the ambition. Goldfinger's drawing is also giving us that sort of grid, but in another sort of inventive way. He's playing with the grid itself. He's actually popping the windows out. He's making some recede, and he's giving us a colonnade without it looking like a colonnade.
When you have these two images side by side, you do see this is a cousin or a relative. This doesn't feel miles away, despite the fact, how many years is that? What, 100, 150 years?
A long time. Now we're standing in front of a pair of drawings of the entryway at Pittsinger Manor, so the gated entrance to the site, and Frank Lloyd Wright's Eagle Feather, which was a retreat located in Malibu. It was his only house located in Malibu, which sadly burned down in 2018. Both of these drawings, separated by about 140 years, give us a sense of what becomes really popular around mid-century in 20th century modernism, and that is the sort of juxtaposition of natural materials. So in the case of Soane's Gateway, we have brick, and Soane became really known for using brick. He was himself the son of a bricklayer. Brick is really the material he works in, but he has paired it here with stone, flint, which gives the design a rusticated texture. The overwhelming sense of the design comes from this juxtaposition between the materials. We see that in Frank Lloyd Wright's Eagle Feather as well. Here we have Frank Lloyd Wright's desert masonry, which is a form of construction that he used using local stone in combination with concrete, paired here with wood. And so we get texture of the stone, the softness of the wood, and it gives us the overall impression of the house, then becomes one of juxtaposition of materials.
In Soane's time, was he seen as a radical? Was he amongst peers who were also working in this way?
Soane was actually criticized for the lack of ornament that he used sometimes. He was thought of as being a bit too bold at times, maybe. His architecture falls out of favor relatively quickly after he dies and isn't really picked up again until the early 20th century, when modernist architects, modernist architectural historians begin thinking actually what he was doing was really along the lines of what we're doing now, but he was doing it a century before.
And we're standing now in front of, well, we've got a tomb and we've got a telephone box here. Maybe not the most obvious combination. Tell me, why have we got these two pieces together? What is the relationship between them?
The tomb that we're looking at is the Soane family tomb. This was what Soane designed for his wife when he was bereaved in 1815. She died very sadly young. We wouldn't necessarily think that this would be a clear example of an influential piece of architecture, and yet it is. Because in the 1920s, in 1924 in particular, architect Giles Gilbert Scott, who was himself a trustee of the Soane Museum, uses the form of the Soane tomb, its shallow dome and its ornament of incised lines, to create the K2 telephone box. Now, the drawing in our show depicts the Jubilee kiosk, which is from 1935. And this one no longer has that ornament of incised lines, but it has that iconic, shallow, domed roof, which I think has become synonymous with the phone box today. And in fact, if you still walk around England, you see that phone box everywhere. Not the exact version, but it does retain that dome. And this was a dome that Soane used widely throughout his work. It can be seen widely throughout the Soane Museum as well. And he referred to it as a canopy, so it gives us a sort of sense of connection to the sky.
that's really evident walking around is the importance of drawings and sketches of particular details for architects of the future, and the importance of archiving. From your perspective, tell me about the importance of having these drawings here.
The show is all drawings, and it's not by accident. It's very intentionally all drawings. And drawings are really special in terms of architecture because they show us what the architect is thinking. They give us some insight into the architectural mind. We have a section of sketchbooks in the show which come from only a handful of projects, yet they depict the same thing over and over and over again. So they show the continual sort of drive for perfection, this sort of continual drive to come up with a concept that really works. One of the sort of really special drawings in the show that illustrates that is a drawing of Soane's Bank of England. What I'd like to draw your attention to is actually just in the corner here. Soane always dated his drawings and always noted where they were drawn, and this one was drawn in Margate. It wasn't drawn while Soane is at his desk working. It's drawn essentially while he's on holiday, but he's still thinking about the Bank of England, and in particularly of Tivoli Corner, which is the corner of the building, how he can make that special. Drawings give just so much insight into the architectural mind.
Erin McKellar. Soane and Modernism, Make It New is on at the Sir John Soane's Museum in London until the 18th of May 2025. I'm joined in the studio by Monocle's Associate Editor, Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, who's also the producer of Monocle on Culture. Welcome, Sophie.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
This is fun. This is good. I like a little bit of cross-pollination between the shows on Monocle Radio. Now, you're here because we're going to talk The Brutalist.
Tell me, why is an accomplished foreign architect shoveling coal here in Philadelphia?
I'm afraid it is not so simple.
It's nominated for 10 Oscars at the time of recording this. It's just picked up 4 more accolades at the BAFTAs. Brady Corbet picked up Best Director. The film also won Best Original Score and Cinematography, and Adrian Brody won the Best Actor for his portrayal of Laszlo Toth. I feel like, given you're the Monocle on Culture representative, can you kind of set the scene for the film for our listeners?
Well, I can try, but I think the first thing to say about The Brutalist is it is a film that is very ambitious, and it's also all about ambition. So it is this enormous 3.5 hour long film. It's got an intermission, thank God.
Can I just say that is so good. To come out and have a little bit of gossip in between and then return, maybe have a couple of glasses of wine as well, I think is quite nice.
Yeah, and it's very old school. The film is kind of huge, and it's about this massive project of brutalist architecture in kind of post-war Europe. So the film is about Laszlo Toth. He's played by Adrian Brody, and he has kind of fled Hungary after the Second World War. He's gone to the US. He's managed to make it there, having survived concentration camps in Europe. He's there and he is tapped to make this incredible library as a gift for someone who becomes a sort of benefactor and begins to work for this man who's called Van Buren.
It is no coincidence that fate brought us together on the eve of my mother's death.
He's then commissioned by Van Buren, who is a very kind of wealthy benefactor, to make this incredibly grand modernist structure. It's an homage to his late mother, and it's a big community centre, and it's got lots of different elements to it. And the film is about Laszlo Toth attempting to make this and breaking new ground in the US, bringing across sort of Bauhaus style and brutalist architecture.
I would like to draw something and present it to you.
You'd like to win the commission. All right, you can do that.
It really centres around the construction of this enormous facility in rural Pennsylvania. There's a great line from Laszlo Toth's wife who, when he starts working on the project, she says, "Promise you won't let it drive you mad," which I absolutely love because the way that he throws himself into his architecture, whilst it's fictional, it's loosely based on, there's a host of different architects that came over post-World War II, Marcel Breuer, Erno Goldfinger and the like, and it certainly, there are some parallels drawn to it with that.
It is about bringing this new kind of vision for architecture to America at this time. And it's really about beauty and what kind of visions of beauty are. And Laszlo Toth has a very exacting, precise, and really kind of wonderful sense of beauty. And you wrote a piece in the most recent issue of Monocle about the Brutalist. But what did you like about it, and especially in terms of its portrayal of architecture?
I think beauty is spot on. That's the word for it. There's so much beautiful, albeit fictional, architecture in this film. That's kind of the power of it, because I think a lot of the time architecture does have a little bit of a reputation problem, that there are lengthy academic pathways in terms of like the general public, ourselves included, being called in to provide feedback on architecture. So often that's limited to a little bit of council feedback online if there's a development happening near you. And then also I think for a lot of the time, lots of everyday spaces aren't beautiful. They're very, very pedestrian, and we kind of learn to accept that, whether that's a badly lit supermarket or a dingy train station. We become accustomed to unremarkable architecture. And that's not to say that every piece of architecture needs to be outstanding, but I think there's plenty that doesn't make the cut in terms of quality. This film's a reminder that we deserve to be surrounded by beautiful things, and we should care about architecture. But maybe one of my favourite moments in the film is they've constructed these enormous concrete walls that frame this beautifully crisp sky, and when you see it for the first time, people like oohed in the cinema. It's just a little bit of a reminder that our everyday, we should demand more from architecture. And I think that's what's nice. For many people, maybe we're not thinking about it, but this film, over the course of nearly 4 hours, really makes you think about architecture and the impact it can have.
Sir, I do not know what the commission entails.
We'll talk about the details at home, but you'll be well compensated.
I know the production designer, Judy Becker, there's been huge praise for her work. What's your take on what she's done here?
One thing to say is that this is such an ambitious film, but on such a tight budget. It's a $10 million film, which is wild. Judy Becker had a really kind of crucial role as the production designer, both for making these architectural, beautiful spaces, but also doing it really on the cheap. They made the library, they did make that as set design, but in terms of the institute, they just made the model that we see often in the film, but they also made a second model that they filmed within. There's this kind of wonderful scene where you see it being built up from the ground on the hill, and that's all just done with tricks of the light and sort of spatial tricks, but actually it's all models. And in terms of Judy Becker's process, she really dove into both brutalist architecture, but also trying to imagine what kind of experiences and spaces Laszlo Toth would have been exposed to up until this point, and how they would have influenced him. A lot of references for concentration camps, how that comes together with kind of Bauhaus style, and pulling all of those elements together to build this institute. And I think the result is really wonderful.
I brought you all out here to join me in looking forward toward the future.
What do you think?
It's unusual, even for you.
One other thing that's very interesting about The Brutalist is its use of Vista Vision, which is a kind of format, a way of filming that was developed 70 years ago, but it's completely fallen out of fashion. This is the first feature film to properly just use Vista Vision for over 6 decades. And I think if we think about brutalism as showing the raw materials and not trying to hide and cover them up the whole time, I think Vista Vision is, in a way, that return to an organic, slightly more sort of immediate. It's very beautiful, and it's a real kind of appreciation for, organic, original film format. So I think that's quite a nice sort of tie-in there as well.
There was a war on, and yet many of the sites of my projects had survived. My buildings were devised to endure such erosion of shoreline.
I think there's also something contemporary that's worth addressing, and the current attitudes towards architecture, at least from a government commissioning standpoint in the United States, might be shifting. Trump's embrace of classical architecture in the context of federal government buildings means that architects that Laszlo Toth is based on, their own work is under threat in the United States. This modernism, these very clean lines, these concrete forms. Have you heard much discussion off the back of this on what role can a film like The Brutalist play in maybe starting to put, I mean, probably hard to put pressure on Trump, but put pressure on people in decision-making positions?
You have a really lovely line in your piece about the film acting as a reminder to marvel and delight in great buildings in person as well as on screen. It is about the sort of appreciation both for these as buildings that are beautiful, but also their kind of ambition and how they were trailblazing and really unique, incredible sort of visions that people had to do something new. So I think it is a little bit about appreciating these spaces. I actually went on a walking tour of postmodernist buildings in central London recently, and it actually ended up being really bittersweet because a lot of the amazing buildings that we were being shown, our tour guide was saying, I think, say goodbye. This is an incredible example of postmodernist architecture, but there is just not the incentive to keep them and to retrofit them and make them worthy for the future. Instead, they're just being knocked down and redeveloped. I'm hopeful that films like The Brutalist can just encourage people to look up, look around them and to appreciate these buildings and also realise that the most sustainable thing to do is just to keep them as they are, retrofit them and not to get rid of them and build some awful new version of them in their place.
No, I could not agree with you more. And maybe this is a nice way to round it off. There's an amazing quote in the film that Laszlo Toth says, and I hope this is what happens to some of those buildings that you've referenced, but he says, "There was a war on, the Second World War, and yet many of the sites of my projects survived. My buildings were devised to endure such erosion of the shoreline." So hopefully those buildings that you saw on your walk, and can I just say I actually did a postmodernist running tour, so I don't mean to one-up you, but
all right, okay.
hopefully some of those buildings that we've seen will endure the erosion of the shoreline. Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, thanks for joining us on Monocle on Design.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Finally, on today's program, we cross to central London to profile a gallery and studio that offers a home for clay enthusiasts in the centre of the city. A year after opening, County Hall Pottery has established its reputation as a space for those curious about ceramics. Here's Monocle's Maisie Ringer.
Nestled in a Grade 2 listed building in the heart of central London lies County Hall Pottery, a ceramics gallery and pottery studio catering to both seasoned ceramicists and those eager to explore the art of pottery for the first time. I met the director of County Hall Pottery, Emma Louise Payne, and Heather Gibson, the potter in residence. Since their initial launch during London Craft Week in 2024, Emma Louise Payne affirms that their vision, to celebrate and support pottery in all its forms while expanding the medium's reach to a wider audience, remains at the heart of what they do.
February the 17th, 2024, we made a company, County Hall Pottery. We agreed that we would have a gallery space, a studio space, and we would have a potter in residence. Was like one of our stipulations of having the pottery here. Like, we wanted there to be life, we wanted to support a recent graduate, but not just recent graduates, people that maybe couldn't have access to ceramic equipment. So hopefully in the future we might have a potter in residence that is a 70-year-old man who has just fallen in love with pottery and wants to come and be part of the team. And then within our studio we want to offer glazing courses and bottle throwing courses and master classes with South Korean potters and bringing Japanese potters over. So making our kind of studio a global platform for all different people to come and teach and share experience and share their love for this material. Hopefully our central London location can bring the world of ceramics to one place and bring people here to share those techniques and materials.
We're sat in the Pottery Studio, located below ground, in County Hall's network of winding corridors. The studio is used for teaching classes to the public, but it's also a space for more experienced potters to pursue their practice, including County Hall's potter in residence.
I'm Heather Gibson, I'm a ceramic artist. I'm the current potter in residence at County Hall Pottery. So I heard about this new pottery studio that had an enormous gas kiln, and I was like, can that really be real? Because that would be my dream come true. I've been here for 4 or 5 months now, and I've had access to the biggest kilns I've probably ever had access to. And I'm here nearly every day. 50% of my time I'm working on my own practice, and the rest of the time I'm giving back to the studio, either helping prepare for exhibitions or being a technical assistant on site, so I help fire in the gas kiln, doing maybe a bit of teaching as well, and that sort of thing.
Heather is a slab builder, drawn to the technique for its freedom to move beyond geometric forms. Through mark making and surface decoration, she transforms everyday shapes into expressive works of art.
I'm really interested in where the boundary is between a functional object and an art object. I tend to use functional forms as a canvas for expressing more abstract and conceptual ideas. Functionality can be anything. It could be a beautiful object. It could be something you hold in your hand like a cup. And I'm kind of interested in exploring that idea and challenging it.
Should we talk a bit about what we've got on the table then? Do you want to just talk me through what we've got in front of us?
So during my residency, I'm focusing on gas reduction firing. So on the table we have right now some pieces from the last firing, and through reduction firing, which is a technique where you use gas as a fuel to create basically flames, I'm really interested in the glazes you can create as a result of those chemical reactions. So we have like a large platter with an expressive surface, and it has celadon glazes, ash glazes, copper red glazes. They're all inspired by Eastern ceramics. A lot of that influence and connection is actually part of our cultural British ceramic tradition here. So I'm interested in taking those traditional visual languages and then being more contemporary and a bit more expressive with them.
So some of these glazes then, would they only do that in a gas kiln?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. These glazes are made with iron and copper. So what the gas kiln is doing is actually consuming some of the oxygen inside the glaze and turning it a different colour. So the iron is turned blue as opposed to brown, which is a lot nicer to look at. And the copper is turned red as opposed to green. So basically it gives you way more kind of subtle surfaces to explore, and I'm interested in layering those on top of each other and seeing what you get.
During the cooling phase, the glaze shrinks over the form, causing the surfaces of some pieces to crack and warp in the kiln. Since these works are created as art pieces rather than functional objects, they embrace imperfection as a medium for creative experimentation. I asked Heather what draws her to this particular style of gas firing.
It's a lot more exciting in terms of the fact that flames come out of it. You're kind of more in charge, you have more control. When you're using a electric kiln, you're basically just putting it in and walking away and everything's fine, and then you come back.
I think Heather's a pyromaniac. Like, she loves the flames. She has like these dark goggles where she's looking at the flames. She's constantly like checking the flames. And I'm like, this looks terrifying. I want to turn, my kiln's a giant toaster. It's electric. I turn it on at night. I go home. I sleep. I don't worry about it. I turn up in the morning and it's finished. Whereas Heather like spends 10 hours licking flames and like,
it's true. And there's definitely benefits to both. There's like, having electric kilns is amazing.
Because I'm lazy. I'm too lazy for your job.
They're both great. I think there's been a bit of a revival, I suppose, around like these more ancient techniques of using fire, which is interesting. I don't know why we're suddenly looking back to the past for inspiration again, but for me personally, I like having that control, you know, being part of the process of firing as well.
Heather will have an exhibition in the building's gallery space in August, marking both Heather's and County Hall's first solo show. For Monocle in London, I'm Maisie Ringer.
And that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans, with help from Steph Chungu. I'm Nick Manise, and you can reach me on nm@monocle.com. Thanks for listening.